To put a wrap on our chapter on particle systems, let's see if we can't make the necessary particle adjustments and the appropriate material so that we end up with a steam effect that turns out looking like this. Okay, let's get to it. The scene we'll be using is called particle steam. You can find it in the Working Files folder. To make our adjustments to the super spray that we have positioned at the tip of the metal pipe, let's select the particle icon, then move our time slider to around frame 20. That'll give us a better look at the changes we'll be making. Let's start by having our particles push a little more to the side. We can do that in the particle formation section by adjusting the off-axis and off-plane spread values. We'll take the off-axis spread to 10 and the off-plane spread to 180. As we do that, you'll be able to see how that spreads the particles in all four of our views. Okay, now let's focus on the camera view by taking that full screen. With the viewport active, I'll simply type Alt-W. For the number of particles we'll use, under particle generation, let's change from use rate to use total. We'll then take the number to 500. So the super spray will emit 500 particles over the course of our animation. That's all we're going to need. Let's also change our viewport display percentage to 50%. With those values in place, let's go ahead and play back our timeline. Okay, let's go ahead and adjust our speed. Down in particle motion, we'll change the speed to 15. This is how fast the particles will move. And we'll change the variation of that speed to 10. This will simply ensure that not all our particles will go exactly the same speed. Let's play that back and see how that looks. For our particle timing, let's take the emit start to frame 15, and we'll take the emit stop to frame 80. We'll leave the display and tell set at 100. On playback, you'll see the first particle being emitted 15 frames in, and the last particle to come out of the emitter is happening back at frame 80. We'll leave the life at each particle set to 30 frames. So each particle generated will die off 30 frames after being emitted. For the particle size, let's change that to 15. With that adjustment, let's also take our viewport display from ticks over to mesh. So there's the default particle shape, triangles. For how each particle will grow or shrink in size over their life, under particle size, let's take the grow for value to 5 and the fade for to 0. Grow for determining how long it'll take for each particle to grow up to the size that we've set, and fade for controlling whether or not the particle shrinks toward the end of its life and how long that shrinkage takes. Setting the number to 0 means that each particle will stay at its set size and not fade out. Okay, we're going to want our steam to appear to dissipate or dissolve away over time. We won't do that though with the super spray settings. We'll instead create that effect with the way that we build our material. Let's go somewhere around the middle of our timeline and we'll render our scene. We'll do that by clicking on the Render Production button on the right-hand side of the toolbar. For our material effect to come out correctly, we'll now need to change the shape of our particles. Ideally, we'll want to use a particle that'll continually face the camera, something that'll remain perpendicular to our view that we can use as a kind of billboard to stamp our steam-like material onto. The perfect particle shape choice for that is one called facing. Let's close the render, heading back to the Modify column. Under particle type, we'll keep our particles set to standard, but we'll change that type to facing. This will create little squares that'll always face our camera. Let's go ahead and render our view so we can see the difference that that facing type particle makes. Okay, that's going to work perfect. If we play things back, we'll be able to see the movement on our facing type particles. Let's also add a little side-to-side movement to our particles as they flow upward. Right-clicking in the Modify column, let's drop down to the Bubble Motion category. Let's take the amplitude to a value of 2. This will control how many units each particle will travel from side to side. For the variation, we'll take that to 100. This simply assures us that not each particle will move the same distance. For period, let's take that to 60. This determines the number of frames that it takes for a particle to make one cycle of movement from one side to the other. So at 60, that side-to-side slide will take 2 seconds. So we can vary the timing of that movement, let's also take the variation to 50. Okay, that's it for our particles. Let's again render somewhere around the middle of our animation. The rest of our steam effect is all up to the material. The trick in making the skin will be to create something that realistically feathers or blends the edges of each particle with its background. So the way we work with the material's opacity will be essential. Let's open up the material editor by typing M. Using the currently selected sample slot, let's rename the material Steam. Having the superspray still selected in the view, we can now click on the Assign Material to Selection icon on the horizontal row of buttons. You'll find it third in from the left-hand side. If you've made good contact, you'll now have white triangles around all 4 borders of the skin. Okay, let's change the sample slot shape to a cube. We'll do that going to the top of the vertical row of icons. Holding your mouse down on the Sample Type button, you can change to a cube. Above the color swatches and just to the right, let's turn on Face Map. This will automatically apply the map that we use to each and every particle face. That's going to be a very important part of the process to making the steam look accurate. Now, we don't want our material to have any shine, so let's keep the specular level at 0. With that nullified, we don't really have to worry too much about the glossiness. Let's now jump up on the opacity map, loading a mask from the browser. In the mask parameters, we now see 2 open slots, one for a map and one for a mask. On the map slot, we'll click on None, then from the browser, load a noise map. Having that in place, we'll hit Go to Parent once. For the mask map, we'll load another mask. On that mask, we'll load a gradient map onto the map slot. Once the gradient map's in place, we'll click on Go to Parent once. Now that should put us back on the mask parameters with the gradient map loaded as the map and an empty slot for the mask. On that empty Mask Map button, we'll add a particle age. A particle age map alters the color of a particle based on the particle's life. For example, the age number 1 value sets the age where the particle starts changing from color number 1 to color number 2, expressed as a percentage of the particle's entire life. It'll be the use of that particle age map loaded in as a mask on our opacity branch that'll give us the dissipation effect that we're looking for on our steam. The map changing from white to gray to black over time will be how that's accomplished. With the particle age loaded as a mask, the skin in the sample slot has disappeared. But don't worry, we'll be okay. Those are the maps that we're going to need for our material. Now we can go back in and make our adjustments. In the editor, let's go ahead and click on Go to Parent twice. That should take you back to the level where you see a noise map loaded as a map and a mask map loaded as a mask. Let's now click on the noise map slot. This will put us up working on the noise pattern. So we can see only the noise in our sample slot, let's turn off Show End Result. Down in the noise settings, let's change the type of noise to fractal. We'll then set the noise size to somewhere around 0.1 or 0.2. Now the whole purpose of this map is simply to make sure that our steam doesn't look too grainy. Setting our noise size as low as we have will make sure that that's accomplished. Okay, let's turn back on Show End Result, and we'll go to our parent once. We'll now click on the Mask Map slot. It should read Mask. Having climbed up one level, let's now access the Gradient Map. It should be in the Map slot. Okay, before we make any adjustments, let's render somewhere around the middle of our animation. I've got my timeline set at frame 50. I'll go ahead and click Render Production. We're not getting any feathering on the edge of our particles. This is where the gradient map will come in. Let's close the render. Down under the 3 color swatches in the gradient parameters category, let's change the gradient type from linear to radial. Once we've done that, we'll render again. Okay, so far so good. Let's close the render, go up to parent once, and we can close the material editor. Let's now change a few things back on our particles. With the super spray selected, I'll change the use total, the total number of particles being used, to 1000. Let's go ahead and render that and see how that changes the effect. Let's also see how a use total of 1500 would look. So with the addition, we now have a thicker looking steam. Let's see how things would look if we change the particle size to 25. Now, the larger particle size makes the steam look a little too solid. There doesn't seem to be enough variation in the overall pattern of the particles. Because of that, let's take the size back down to 15. If it's not the size that we can adjust, maybe we need to spread the particles out just a tad. Back at the top of the settings under Basic Parameters, let's change the off-axis spread from 10 to 20. Okay, now that things have been pushed a little more side to side, maybe we can get away with bumping up our particle size a bit. As you can see, it's a real back and forth thing making these adjustments. Let's take our particle size to 20 and we'll render again. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Now, back on the material, a real quick suggestion. When you're making a material for a particle system that'll have some level of transparency, like the one we have here, don't be spending a lot of time on perfecting the skin's look until you've actually layered it onto the official background image. Whether that be a solid background like we're using here, or a picture of one kind or another. The reason for that is because transparent materials will look completely different against different backgrounds. Smoke, for an example, that looks great against a black background might not look as good against a lighter or patterned background. So decide on your background first, then go start adjusting the look of your particles. Let's see if we can't brighten the steam a bit by changing the self-illumination on our material. Back in the material editor, I'll return to the base or top of the material and take the self-illumination to 100. Let's render that again for comparison purposes. Now that might be just a bit bright. Let's lower the self-illumination to 50. Okay, then as a last tweak, if we wanted to change the color, maybe we make that a little bit whiter. I think that'll do it. Rendering things out, we'd end up with something that looked like this. I've put a copy of this clip in the Working Files folder. It's called Particle Steam. And it's a super quick change to make our effect look more like smoke. Like maybe something coming off a burning building or out of a car's tailpipe. You'd simply change the color of the particles and put them up against a lighter colored background. I'll change the diffuse color on my steam to black, and I'll render that up against a white background. So there you go with a little project on creating steam. And as an added kicker at the end, we also got a little smoke out of the effect. I'm going to go ahead and change things back to their original colors, then save the scene out as Particle Steam Completed if you'd like to go in and look it over. Nice effect. Now you've got something you can add to your own projects.